The mysterious arrival. It was a quiet evening in Pine Hollow, a small town tucked away in the hills. The sun was slowly setting, casting a golden hue across the horizon. People were finishing up their day, enjoying the calm of the late afternoon. Birds flew by, and the soft rustling of the trees filled the air. But all of that peacefulness was shattered by a sudden loud explosion. The sound was deafening, like a thunderclap that came from nowhere. The ground shook beneath everyone's feet, and windows rattled in their frames. The noise was so powerful that it sent a wave of panic through the town. People ran outside, trying to figure out what had happened. What they saw next, they would never forget. In the distance, a massive flash of light lit up the sky. It was followed by a trail of thick smoke that rose high above the trees. People stood frozen, staring at the smoke, wondering if it was a military plane, a satellite, or something much worse. But no one had any idea what it could be. Then came the crash. Something fell from the sky, fast and hard, like a shooting star streaking down to Earth. The crash was so intense that it created a shockwave, shaking the ground again. Trees in the forest bent, and a giant cloud of dust and debris rose into the air. The town was silent for a moment, as if the whole world had stopped to witness the event. "Call the police," shouted a man from the crowd, his voice trembling. "Something just crashed out there." People quickly grabbed their phones and dialed emergency numbers, but the police didn't know what to make of it. The sound had been so unusual, and the event so strange, that no one knew how to respond. Within minutes, sirens could be heard as fire trucks and police cars rushed to the scene. They arrived at the edge of the forest, their flashing lights lighting up the darkening sky. The air smelled of smoke and something unfamiliar. The local sheriff, Lucas, stepped out of his car and surveyed the area. His face was hard, focused. He had seen his fair share of strange events in this quiet town, but this felt different. There was something unnatural about it. "Do we know what it is?" Sheriff Lucas asked, turning to the fire chief, who had just arrived. The fire chief shook his head. "No idea, but whatever it is, it's big. The whole forest is burning." The sheriff frowned. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Get some teams in there. We need to make sure there's no danger." Just as they were preparing to go deeper into the forest, a black van pulled up to the scene. The van had no markings, no logos. The doors opened, and out stepped a group of people dressed in dark, tactical clothing. Their leader was a woman with short, black hair and sharp eyes. She carried a briefcase, and her movements were quick and precise. "Step aside," the woman ordered, her voice cold and commanding. "We'll handle this from here." Sheriff Lucas stepped forward. "Who are you? What's going on here?" The woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she handed a piece of paper to the sheriff. It was a government order demanding control of the crash site. The sheriff glanced at it briefly, but didn't seem satisfied. He wanted answers. "This is my town," Lucas said firmly. "I'm in charge here." "We're all in charge now," the woman replied with a sharp smile. "You'll find out soon enough. Just stay out of our way." The sheriff wanted to argue, but something in her tone told him it was useless. He nodded and stepped back, reluctantly allowing the team to take control of the scene. The woman signaled for her team to move forward. They entered the forest, their flashlights cutting through the dark, smoky air. Sheriff Lucas had no choice but to follow from a distance. As he walked through the trees, the air grew colder, and the ground beneath his feet felt strangely soft. The usual sounds of the forest were gone. No birds, no animals. It was as if everything had disappeared in the wake of whatever had crashed. After a few minutes of walking, they came to a clearing. The smell of burning wood was thick, and the ground was scorched. The smoke made it difficult to see, but in the center of the clearing, something strange caught the light. A large, glowing object sat in the middle of the debris. It was not something that could have come from Earth. It was metal, but not the kind of metal known to humankind. The shape was irregular, almost organic, as if it didn't belong. The team surrounded the object, but the woman didn't seem to care about it. Her attention was fixed on the ground near the object. The team began digging, uncovering what appeared to be a figure. A young girl, unconscious, was half buried under the wreckage. She looked human, at least at first glance. Her skin was pale, almost glowing, and her hair was long and silver. She was dressed in strange clothes that didn't look like anything from Earth. Her breathing was shallow, and she didn't move. The woman knelt beside her, checking her vitals. "She's alive," the woman said, standing up. "Get her to the van. Now." As the team moved to carry the girl away, Sheriff Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. This wasn't just an accident. Whatever this girl was, whatever this object was, it was no coincidence. The woman's cold expression suggested she knew more than she was letting on. And the silence of the forest only deepened the mystery. "What is going on here?" Lucas muttered to himself. The girl's arrival was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that could change everything. Pine Hollow would never be the same again. The mysterious human medic. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow across the town of Pine Hollow, the mysterious van sped off into the night, its headlights cutting through the smoke-filled forest. Sheriff Lucas stood silently, watching the government team drive away with the alien girl. His mind was spinning with questions that had no answers. He couldn't shake the feeling that something very important had just happened, and he was being kept in the dark. Back at the town's small clinic, a different story was unfolding. Dr. Ethan Miller, a quiet, unassuming man in his early 30s, was finishing his shift at the Pine Hollow Medical Center. He had always been a humble medic, never seeking attention, never wanting the spotlight. He spent his days helping the townspeople with minor injuries, the occasional flu, and small emergencies. It wasn't glamorous, but it was what he did best. There was nothing extraordinary about him, nothing that made him stand out. Or so he thought. He was wiping down the counter when his phone rang, breaking the silence of the clinic. He glanced at the caller ID. "Sheriff Lucas." He hesitated, then answered. "Ethan, I need you at the scene." Now, the sheriff's voice was urgent. "Sheriff, what's going on?" Ethan asked, his heart beginning to race. He was used to the occasional call about a car accident or a minor injury, but the urgency in Lucas's tone was different. "You won't believe this, Ethan. Someone, just crashed outside of town. I need you to come and help. We're going to need a medic, and you're the closest." Ethan's eyebrows furrowed. "A crash? What kind of crash?" "There's no time to explain. Just get here. I'll meet you at the edge of the forest." Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his medical kit, slipped into his jacket, and rushed out the door. As he drove toward the forest, his mind raced with thoughts of what could be going on. A plane, a satellite, or maybe some kind of disaster. He had no idea, but he could tell from the sheriff's tone that this wasn't your typical emergency. When Ethan arrived at the forest's edge, the sight that greeted him left him speechless. A group of men and women in dark clothing surrounded an area where smoke still billowed into the air. Sheriff Lucas stood off to the side, his arms crossed, his face tense. As Ethan approached, the sheriff gave him a quick nod. "You made it," Lucas said quietly. "Follow me." The medic had no choice but to follow, although his heart was pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had a feeling it would be something he would never forget. They walked into the forest, deeper than Ethan had ever gone before. The air was thick with smoke, and there was a strange smell, something metallic and unfamiliar. The trees, once vibrant and alive, now looked twisted, as if they had been burned by something far beyond normal fire. As they approached a clearing, the shadows seemed to grow longer. Then he saw it. The wreckage of a large metallic object lay in the center of the clearing. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It wasn't a plane, nor a satellite. It was something foreign, alien, even. The design was organic, as if the ship had grown out of the ground rather than being built by human hands. But what caught Ethan's attention most wasn't the wreckage. It was the girl. She was lying on the ground, pale and still. Her skin had a strange bluish tint, almost glowing under the dim light. Her hair was long and silver, shining faintly in the smoke-filled air. Her clothes were torn and unfamiliar, nothing like anything Ethan had ever seen. And her face, it was calm, but there was an unreadable expression on her features. Ethan crouched beside her, his medical instincts kicking in. He checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. Her breathing was shallow, and her body was cold to the touch. His mind raced. Whoever this girl was, she was in critical condition. A woman in a dark uniform stepped forward and looked at Ethan. "You're the medic?" she asked, her voice cold. "Yeah, I'm Dr. Ethan Miller," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing sense of unease. "What happened to her?" "We don't know," the woman answered, her gaze fixed on the girl. "But we need to get her out of here as quickly as possible. Can you help?" Ethan nodded quickly. "I can help, but I'll need to examine her properly. She's in bad shape. We need to get her back to the clinic." The woman looked around, then nodded at the two men standing nearby. "Get her to the van. We'll take care of the rest." As the men carefully lifted the girl onto a stretcher, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something much bigger than he had expected. This wasn't a simple rescue mission. There was more to this situation than met the eye. As they moved toward the van, Ethan asked the woman, "What exactly is going on here? Who is she?" The woman remained silent for a moment, then finally spoke, her voice low. "She's not from here, but that's all I can tell you for now." Ethan didn't press further. He was more focused on the girl, his mind working quickly to figure out what kind of medical care she needed. Her alien physiology was like nothing he had ever studied, but he was determined to do whatever it took to help her. He had no idea who she was, or where she came from, but one thing was clear: her survival was his responsibility now. As the van sped toward the clinic, Ethan's mind raced. Who was this girl, and why had she come to Earth? The mystery was only beginning, and he knew that the answers he sought might not be easy to find. The awakening. The cold, sterile air of Pine Hollow's clinic felt oddly comforting to Dr. Ethan Miller as he hurriedly prepared for the arrival of the alien girl. His heart raced, his hands steady despite the overwhelming sense of uncertainty. He had treated all sorts of injuries in his career, from broken bones to illnesses, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. The mysterious girl from the wreckage. She wasn't from this world. Ethan had seen the fear and confusion in her eyes before she was carried into the clinic, but he hadn't been able to understand what was happening. Why was she here? What was she? As he set up the examination room, his mind raced with questions. The government team had been silent, offering him no answers. They were treating the girl like some kind of experiment, not a patient. Ethan had seen their cold expressions, their eyes filled with secrets, and he didn't trust them. They wanted to keep her for themselves, to hide her away from the world. But he had sworn an oath to help those in need, no matter who or what they were. The clinic was quiet except for the soft hum of the lights above. The room was dimly lit, the blinds pulled down to block out the harsh daylight. The walls were lined with simple medical equipment, nothing too fancy, but enough for the small town's needs. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke his concentration. He turned to see the two men from the government team carefully carrying the girl into the room on a stretcher. Her silver hair seemed to glow faintly in the low light. The metallic scent of her skin still lingered in the air, like something foreign and strange. "Set her down here," Ethan instructed. He watched as the men placed her gently on the examination table, their faces impassive, as if this was just another assignment to them. Ethan's heart beat faster as he moved closer to her. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of her silver hair away from her face. Her skin felt cold, almost unnaturally so. He could hear the faint, labored sound of her breathing. Her eyes were still closed, her expression calm, but there was an unsettling stillness about her. "Is she going to be all right?" one of the men asked, his voice cold, lacking any real concern. He seemed more interested in the results than the girl herself. Ethan didn't look up. "I'm not sure," he said quietly. "I need to run some tests. Her physiology is completely different from anything I've seen." The woman in charge of the team, who had been standing by the door, spoke up. "We need to move quickly. This is a government matter, Dr. Miller. Do not take too long." Ethan turned to her, his frustration barely held in check. "I'm a doctor, not a soldier. I'll take whatever time I need to figure out what's wrong with her. This isn't just a simple injury. She needs care." The woman narrowed her eyes. "Fine. But remember, her safety is of the utmost importance. We have protocols to follow." Ethan didn't respond. He had his hands full just trying to figure out how to help this girl. But he also knew he had to be careful. Whatever this government team was up to, it didn't feel right. They weren't acting like they cared about the girl. They were more concerned with getting her to their labs, their controlled environments. He turned his attention back to the girl on the table. His first step was to check her vital signs. She had a pulse, weak but steady. Her breathing, although shallow, was consistent, but her body temperature was far lower than normal. It was as if her body wasn't functioning in the same way as a human's. He couldn't help but wonder where she had come from. How had she arrived here? And why? The wreckage in the forest had been so strange. Nothing like anything Earth had ever seen. And this girl, this alien girl, was now lying in his clinic, needing his help. As Ethan prepared to run a few scans, he noticed a faint movement in the girl's fingers. He froze for a moment, staring at her hand. Slowly, the girl's fingers twitched again, this time more deliberately. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Was she waking up? Without warning, the girl's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she didn't move, just stared at the ceiling with wide violet eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Ethan stepped back, unsure of what to do, his heart racing as the girl slowly tried to sit up. She struggled, her movements weak at first, but then she pushed herself up onto her elbows, her silver hair spilling over her shoulders. She looked around the room, confusion written all over her face. Her eyes landed on Ethan, and she froze, her expression full of fear and uncertainty. She didn't seem to understand where she was, or what had happened. Ethan took a step toward her, his voice gentle. "You're safe. You're in a hospital. My name is Dr. Ethan Miller." The girl's gaze flickered to his face, but she didn't speak. She seemed to be processing his words, as if trying to make sense of them. Suddenly, her eyes widened in panic. She tried to stand, her body trembling. The moment she moved, Ethan rushed to her side, trying to steady her. Hey, it's okay," he said softly, his hands on her arms. "You're not in danger." But the girl was shaking her head rapidly, her breathing growing more frantic. She grabbed onto Ethan's wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes were filled with something. Fear, desperation. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said, his voice low, trying to calm her. "You're not alone." Her eyes locked onto his, searching for something. Her alien features were so different from anything he had seen, but in her eyes there was a human emotion, a longing for safety, a desire for understanding. The girl seemed to calm, her grip loosening slightly. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, but Ethan could see the exhaustion in her face. As the girl sat back on the table, her gaze drifted to the door where the government agents were waiting. She tensed again, her eyes flickering with fear. They were watching her, their cold, calculating stares making her uncomfortable. "I need to talk to her," Ethan said, his voice firm but gentle. He turned to the woman in charge. "Alone." The woman hesitated for a moment before nodding. She motioned for the other agents to follow her out of the room, leaving Ethan alone with the girl. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, the girl relaxed slightly, her posture easing. Ethan stepped closer, now alone with her. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I promise." But in the back of his mind, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to take a much darker turn. This girl had just awoken, and already, it seemed as though the secrets surrounding her were more dangerous than anyone realized. Secrets unveiled. The clinic's silence seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Dr. Ethan Miller stood at the side of the examination table, watching the alien girl as she sat there, visibly trembling. Her violet eyes darted around the room, as though she was trying to make sense of everything. She was clearly confused, scared even, but there was something in her eyes that held his attention. A quiet strength, a sense of purpose that couldn't be ignored. Ethan had been a doctor for years, but never had he seen a patient like this, a human-like being, yet so utterly different. Her skin was pale with an iridescent glow, and her silver hair shimmered faintly, as though it was alive with its own light. Her clothes were torn, but they looked nothing like anything from Earth, strange fabrics that seemed to shift and shimmer with a life of their own. But it was her eyes, those haunting violet eyes, that held him captive. They spoke of knowledge, loss, and a deep, unspoken fear. He took a step forward, trying to be as calm as possible. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. The girl flinched slightly at his words, her body instinctively retreating. Ethan immediately held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you," he assured her. "You're safe here." She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly shook her head, her eyes growing more desperate as she looked toward the door. She could hear the agents outside, murmuring to each other, their cold voices seeping through the thin walls. Ethan could see the fear creeping into her face again. "Don't worry about them," he said softly. "I'm the one who's going to help you." The girl's eyes shifted toward him, her face softening just slightly, but the fear was still there. She couldn't fully trust him, not yet, and Ethan understood that. She was scared, lost, and alone. He needed to know more. He had to understand what had happened to her, what she was, and where she had come from. But he also knew that whatever had brought her here was dangerous, and there were forces beyond his control that were already closing in on her. The clinic's door creaked open slowly. The woman from the government team entered, her sharp eyes never leaving the girl. Ethan quickly turned, blocking her path. "I told you," Ethan said firmly. "I need to talk to her alone." The woman paused, her face cold and unreadable. "She's not your patient, Dr. Miller," she said flatly. "You're not authorized to." "She's a person," Ethan interrupted, his voice rising just slightly. "A living, breathing person. She deserves the same care as anyone else." The woman's eyes flashed with something cold and calculating. "I understand your concern, doctor. But you need to understand something else. She's not just any patient. We are here to protect this world from something much bigger than you realize." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't trust her. "What do you mean?" The woman took a deep breath and glanced at the girl, who had turned her gaze toward the floor. Her shoulders slumped as though she were trying to hide from the world. "The girl you're treating," the woman said in a lower voice, "she's not from Earth. And she's not the only one. She's part of something much larger than you can comprehend." Ethan's mind raced. "What do you mean? She's not from Earth. Is she from another planet?" The woman nodded curtly. "Yes, and she's not here by accident." Ethan took a step back, stunned. "You're telling me she's an alien. But why? Why is she here? What does she want?" The woman's eyes softened, just for a moment. "We don't know yet, but whatever it is, we need to control it." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. Ethan could feel the air between them thickening with tension. This was bigger than him, bigger than the small town of Pine Hollow, bigger than anything he had ever imagined. "I need to help her," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's injured. She's scared. And I'm not going to let you take her without knowing more." The woman narrowed her eyes. "You're making a mistake. Before Ethan could respond, the girl suddenly spoke. Her voice was quiet, weak, but her words carried a strange clarity. "Please, don't let them take me," she whispered, her violet eyes locking onto Ethan's. I'm not who they think I am. I don't want to hurt anyone." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. She was speaking. Not just simple words, but a plea. A desperate plea. The woman looked sharply at the girl, her face hardening. "You don't know what you're saying." But Ethan was focused entirely on the girl. Her fear was real. He could see it in the way her hands trembled, in the way she was trying to make herself smaller, as though she were trying to disappear into the table beneath her. "What's your name?" Ethan asked gently, stepping closer. The girl swallowed, her throat dry. I don't know. I don't remember. My name is Lost." The woman looked furious at the girl's words, but Ethan was more concerned with what she had just said. Lost. Was it possible that this girl had been sent here with no memory of her own life, of who she was, who had sent her, and why? Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden burst of static from the woman's radio. She grabbed it from her belt quickly, speaking in clipped words to someone on the other end. "They're coming," she said, her voice tight. "We need to move her now." Ethan's heart sank. He knew what that meant. The government wasn't here to help her. They were here to control her. And in that moment, he realized he had to make a choice. He couldn't let them take her. Not without answers. Not without understanding who this girl really was. "Wait," Ethan said, his voice filled with urgency. "Tell me more about her. Why is she here? Who sent her?" The woman's expression was cold, but she hesitated for just a moment. "We don't have all the answers yet, but we know one thing. She's part of something. Something that could change the course of history." Before Ethan could speak again, the woman snapped. "We don't have time for this. The others are already on their way." Ethan's mind raced. He had no choice. He couldn't let them take her without knowing the truth. He turned to the girl, his resolve hardening. "You're not alone," he said softly. "I'm going to help you, but you have to trust me." The girl's eyes flickered with a glimmer of hope. "Trust," she whispered, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. With a deep breath, Ethan made his decision. He would protect her, no matter the cost. But little did he know, the journey they were about to embark on would reveal secrets far darker and more dangerous than either of them could imagine. A dangerous choice. Ethan's heart raced as the woman from the government team grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her gently but firmly toward the door. The girl's fear was palpable, her violet eyes wide and desperate as she looked back at Ethan, pleading silently for help. Ethan's mind spun. He knew the government team's intentions. They weren't there to help the girl. They weren't interested in her well-being. They were there to control her, to use her for something unknown. He couldn't let that happen. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The woman's grip on the girl's arm tightened, and the girl's body tensed, as if she were bracing for something terrible. "Stop," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "You can't take her like this." The woman turned slowly, her eyes narrowing with irritation. "I don't think you understand the situation, Dr. Miller. She's not just a patient. She's part of something much larger. Something beyond your comprehension." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "I understand more than you think. And right now, all I care about is her safety. She's scared. She's not a weapon. She's a person, and she deserves to be treated like one." The woman didn't respond immediately, her face a mask of indifference. She glanced briefly at the girl, who was now shaking, her fear evident in the way her body trembled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," the woman said in a low, dangerous tone. "If we don't take her now, we risk losing everything. You don't understand the threat she poses." The words hit Ethan like a slap to the face. He had no idea what was going on, but he couldn't let them take her without knowing more. "What threat?" he asked, his voice rising. "Who sent her here? What does she want? I have a right to know." The woman didn't answer right away. Her eyes flickered for a moment, and Ethan saw something there, something between regret and fear. But it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "We don't have time for this," she snapped, her voice hard again. "The situation is far more dangerous than you realize." Ethan stepped forward, blocking her path. "I don't care about your dangerous situation. I'm not going to let you take her unless you give me answers." The woman's eyes turned cold. She glanced at the two agents standing by the door, silently signaling them to step forward. "You can't stop this, Dr. Miller," she said, her voice taking on a chilling edge. "If you get in our way, there will be consequences. You don't want to do that." Ethan stood firm. He was out of his element, but something inside him told him that this was the right thing to do. He had to protect her. He had to help her. "I won't let you hurt her," he said, his voice low but determined, not without knowing the truth. For a moment, there was only silence in the room. The woman's cold gaze locked onto his, her jaw clenched tightly. Ethan could see that she was weighing her options. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then something unexpected happened. The girl spoke. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't fight. Don't fight for me." Ethan turned quickly, his heart aching as he saw the tears welling in her eyes. "No," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "I'm not going to let them hurt you. You're not alone." The girl shook her head weakly. "You don't understand. If they take me, it will be worse. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Please, let them take me." Ethan's stomach churned at her words. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else, something deeper. She wasn't just afraid of the government team. She was afraid of something far worse. "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking. "Why do you want them to take you? What are you hiding?" The girl looked down, her silver hair falling over her face as she tried to control her trembling. "I don't want anyone to get caught in the middle of this. They think I'm a weapon, but I'm not. I'm running from something dangerous." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What are you running from? Who are you really?" The girl met his gaze, her eyes filled with sorrow and terror. "I don't remember everything. But I know one thing. They're coming for me. They won't stop until they have me." The weight of her words hit Ethan like a wave. She wasn't just some alien. She was running for her life, from something far beyond anything he could imagine. The government wasn't the only threat to her. They were just part of the equation. And whatever was after her was far more dangerous. The woman from the government team took a step forward. "Enough," she said, her voice cold and final. "This conversation is over." Ethan stood up quickly, his body tensing as he realized the decision he now had to make. The girl was right. If they took her, it would be the end. He couldn't let that happen. Not when she was so scared, so vulnerable. "I won't let you have her," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. "If I have to, I'll protect her with my life." The woman's eyes blazed with fury. "You're making a huge mistake, Dr. Miller. You have no idea what you're up against." Ethan didn't care. The truth didn't matter to him anymore. Only the girl's safety mattered. He had to make a choice, and that choice was to protect her, no matter what it cost him. As the agents moved toward him, Ethan made his decision. "I won't let you take her," he said, his voice rising with authority. "I'm taking her away from here. You'll have to go through me." The woman's gaze shifted to the two agents. "Do it." Before Ethan could react, one of the agents lunged forward, grabbing him by the arms. But Ethan was ready. He fought back, pushing the agent away with all his strength. His mind raced. He had to get the girl out of there. They didn't have much time. With a burst of adrenaline, Ethan grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her from the table. "Come on," he urged her. "We're getting out of here." The girl hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded, her fear and uncertainty still evident in her eyes. She trusted him. And for the first time, Ethan felt as though he was doing something right. Together, They ran out of the clinic, into the unknown. They didn't have much time, but they couldn't stop now. Whatever was after her, whatever the government wanted, they had to stay one step ahead. Because Ethan knew one thing for sure: the moment they left the clinic, there would be no turning back. And the danger had only just begun. Into the unknown. The cold night air hit Ethan's face as he and the girl ran from the clinic, adrenaline pumping through their veins. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he looked over his shoulder. The government agents were right behind them, closing the gap quickly. They had no time to waste. The girl stumbled slightly as she ran beside him, her legs unsteady. Ethan's mind raced. He had to find somewhere safe, somewhere to hide. He couldn't let them capture her. Not now. Not when they were so close to uncovering the truth. Keep going, he urged her, tightening his grip on her hand as they sprinted through the darkened streets of Pine Hollow. He could hear the agent's footsteps growing louder, the sounds of pursuit only adding to the pressure building in his chest. The girl's breathing was shallow, strained. She looked terrified, her face pale, her silver hair flying behind her like a shimmering comet. Her violet eyes were wide with panic, but there was something else in them. Something that told him she wasn't just afraid of being caught. She was afraid of something far worse. "Where do we go?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their running feet. Ethan didn't know the answer. He had no plan. All he knew was that they needed to get out of sight. Fast. He glanced around desperately, looking for any place that might offer some cover. There, ahead, a narrow alleyway between two old buildings. "Over there," Ethan shouted, pulling her toward the alley. They ducked into the darkness just as the first government agent turned the corner. Ethan pressed his back against the cold brick wall, holding his breath. He could hear the agent's boots echoing in the distance, searching. The girl was shaking beside him, her fear palpable. Ethan's thoughts raced. The government was after her, but why? What did they want with her? And why had she told him she was running from something worse? She didn't seem like a threat. If anything, she was just a scared girl trying to survive. "Are they gone?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. Ethan slowly peeked around the corner. The agents had passed by. For now, they were safe. "We're okay for now," he said, trying to calm her. "But we can't stay here long. We need to keep moving." The girl nodded, but Ethan could see the fear still in her eyes. She wasn't just afraid of being caught. She was afraid of something that lingered beneath the surface, a deeper fear that had nothing to do with the government agents. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing with questions. He needed answers. He needed to know what she was running from, and why the government was so determined to find her. He had to protect her, but he couldn't do that without understanding the full picture. "We need to talk," Ethan said, turning to face her. "I need to know what's going on. Who's after you? What's the real threat?" The girl hesitated, looking away as if she were weighing whether or not to tell him the truth. Her eyes were filled with uncertainty, but there was something else too, a longing. As if she had been carrying this burden for far too long and was finally ready to let someone in. "I'm not from here," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm not human. Not in the way you think." Ethan's stomach tightened. He had already suspected that much. But hearing her confirm it made the situation all the more real and far more dangerous. "You're not from Earth?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She nodded slowly. "No, I'm not. My people are different, and the government isn't the only one looking for me. There are others, worse ones." Ethan's mind raced. Worse than the government. The girl's eyes darkened. "Much worse. The ones who are after me, they don't care about anything. They're not interested in control or research. They want something else, something that could change everything." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What do they want?" She hesitated, biting her lip as though unsure how much to reveal. "They want to use me," she whispered. They think I can help them. Open a door to a place where they can get power. Power beyond anything you can imagine. Ethan's mind struggled to process her words. A door. Power? What kind of power was she talking about? And why was she the key to it? Why you? He asked, his voice shaky. Why are you the one they need? The girl's eyes flickered with something like pain. Because I'm not just any alien. I'm connected to them, to the place they're trying to reach. I don't remember everything, but I know that if they find me, they'll destroy everything in their path. Ethan's mind was spinning. A door, a place, power. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, not real life. But the fear in the girl's eyes was real, and the government's pursuit of her was even more real. He took a deep breath. So what now? Where do we go? What do we do? She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. I don't know. I just need to be far from here. Far from them. If I stay in one place for too long, they'll find me. And when they do, it'll be too late. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew she was right. They couldn't stay in Pine Hollow. They needed to disappear, to go somewhere no one could find them. But where? And how? He didn't have the answers. Not yet. We'll figure it out, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. But we need to move. We can't stay in one place. The girl nodded, and together, they crept out of the alley and back into the dark streets. The government agents might be close, but they didn't have a choice. The only way out of this was to keep moving into the unknown. The final escape. The night felt colder now, a chill that settled deep in Ethan's bones as he and the girl walked through the deserted streets of Pine Hollow. The lights in the houses had long since gone out, the town's peaceful exterior belying the chaos that was about to unfold. The sound of their footsteps echoed eerily in the stillness, and every distant noise sent a wave of tension through Ethan's body. They couldn't stop now. Not when the worst was yet to come. The girl's hand was cold in his, but Ethan didn't let go. He couldn't afford to. She was fragile, vulnerable, but she was also the key to something much larger than anything he had ever encountered. And the truth, the whole truth, seemed just beyond his reach. Where are we going? She whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she glanced around nervously. They'll be looking for us. We can't just walk into the woods or anywhere they could find us. Ethan stopped for a moment, trying to think. His mind was clouded, his thoughts moving too fast to make sense of them all. He had no plan. The girl was right. They couldn't hide forever. And if they stayed in one place for too long, the government or whoever else was after her would track them down. But where could they go that would be safe? Then it hit him, a place he hadn't thought of before. It was risky, but it was their best shot. I know somewhere, he said, pulling her along. But we have to hurry. The girl hesitated, clearly unsure. Are you sure? Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. We don't have a choice. It's our only chance. She nodded reluctantly, and they picked up the pace, walking faster now. They had to get to the place he had in mind before the others found them. He had been there once before, many years ago, when he was younger. It was an old shelter, hidden deep in the forest, far from prying eyes. Not many people knew about it. It wasn't much, just an old stone cabin with a few supplies left behind by its original owners. But it was out of the way. Isolated. The air grew colder the further they went, and the streets grew quieter. Ethan's breath came in clouds, his thoughts focused entirely on the girl beside him. She was looking at the ground, her face drawn in exhaustion and fear, her violet eyes flickering nervously with every noise they heard. Do you think they'll find us? She asked softly, her voice barely audible. Ethan wanted to reassure her, but he knew the truth. I don't know, he said, his voice low. But we have to try. We can't just sit here waiting for them to catch us. She didn't answer, but he could feel her grip tighten around his hand, as if she were drawing strength from him. He wished he could offer her more than just empty promises. But the only thing he could offer her right now was his protection, and that didn't feel like nearly enough. They reached the edge of town, where the forest began. The trees loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Ethan led the way, carefully navigating the undergrowth, and the girl followed closely behind, her steps quick and light. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the shelter, an old stone cabin hidden behind a wall of thick bushes. It was barely noticeable unless you knew exactly where to look. Ethan felt a small wave of relief wash over him as they reached it. They had made it. For now, at least. He pushed open the door, and they slipped inside. The cabin was dark, save for the faint moonlight filtering through cracks in the walls. It was cold inside, but it offered them the shelter they desperately needed. Ethan closed the door quietly behind them, making sure no one had seen them enter. The girl looked around the cabin with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. She had no idea where they were, or what this place meant, but Ethan could tell she was grateful to be out of the open. "Are we safe here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For now," Ethan said, his tone more uncertain than he wanted it to be. "It's not perfect, but it'll do." He moved to one of the old chairs in the corner of the room, trying to settle his mind. They were safe for the moment, but he knew this wouldn't last. The government would be searching, and they couldn't stay here forever. As he sat down, the girl sat beside him, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. She seemed lost, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her fragile shoulders. Ethan wanted to ask more questions, but he knew she wasn't ready to talk yet. She had already shared so much, and it was clear she was carrying more than she could bear. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, "for dragging you into this. I didn't want anyone to get hurt because of me." Ethan looked at her, surprised by her words. He shook his head gently. "You didn't drag me into anything. I chose to help you. I don't regret it." The girl gave a small, sad smile. "But you don't know what you're up against. It's not just the government. They're just the beginning. They're after me, but they're after something much worse than they even realize." Ethan leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What are they after?" The girl looked away, her eyes dark with memories. "They think they can control me. They think I have the power to unlock something, a place, a dimension, where they can take control of everything. But they're wrong. If they succeed, everything will change. It won't just be Earth at risk. It'll be everything." Ethan's stomach dropped as the weight of her words hit him. What she was saying was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Whatever was at stake here, it wasn't just her life. It was the fate of the world. "We have to stop them," he said quietly, his voice firm. "We can't let them get their hands on you." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with both fear and something else. A spark of hope, perhaps. "I don't know how we can stop them. But if we don't, it'll be the end." Ethan didn't answer right away. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. But one thing was clear now. There was no going back. Whatever came next, whatever dangers they would face, he was in this with her. They both sat in silence, the weight of their situation settling around them. The night outside was still and quiet, but they both knew the storm was coming, and it wouldn't stop until the government, or something far worse, found them. Ethan looked at the girl beside him, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. The final escape had only just begun.